We are very fortunate to have the great Leith Van Onselen from macrobusiness.com.au. We call this a Treasury of Common Sense because everything the great man says is common sense. We have an important issue to raise when we get to our clown of the week, and it is a clown, I'm happy to tell you. But first off, g'day Leith, good to catch up, mate. The productivity challenge is there. It remains there after the Talk Fest. Why are we failing in productivity?
The productivity summit that we've just had is the biggest waste of time I've ever seen, and it's a waste of time because it hasn't bothered to address the two key areas that are, which I argue are contributing to Australia's decline in productivity and living standards. So, first of all, as we know, it hasn't addressed the fact that Australia is running an excessively high, poorly targeted, and low-skilled migration system, which we've run for the better part of 20 years. Australia's population has grown by about 8.7 million people this century. We've grown at an enormous rate. It hasn't been targeted. We've got skill shortages everywhere despite bringing in millions and millions of people that never seems to solve the problem. And it's contributed to lower productivity because it's basically crush-loaded everything. So basically, we haven't built enough infrastructure to keep up with all the people. Businesses haven't been able to provide enough business investment for all the millions of extra workers that have come in. So it means that's tools, machinery, that sort of stuff. That means that your workforce becomes less productive. And then we also obviously haven't built enough houses for the millions of extra families that have come in. Then as a result, we're all suffering under crush loading, lower productivity growth, and our living standards have basically gone down, not up. And, effectively the nation's capital base, that's all your equipment, your infrastructure, your everything, has basically been diluted because the amount of capital investment per person has shrunk. And that harms your living standards ultimately, and ultimately harms your productivity. And of course, this wasn't discussed at all at this latest productivity summit. It's ridiculous. And the other area where we've failed is we've obviously, we've got soaring energy costs due to these idiotic net zero policies and the failure to fix the gas market and reserve gas on the East Coast. And as a result, we've added enormous costs throughout the entire supply chain through the economy. We've deindustrialised because our manufacturing sector, which uses a lot of energy and has to, can't compete anymore because of high energy costs. And that's effectively forced the country to, deindustrialise, manufacturing sector to close, to basically shut down or downscale. We've lost a whole bunch of manufacturers in a whole bunch of important areas like fertilizers, plastics, glass making, all these sorts of areas. A lot of them just gone offshore now because it's too expensive to produce anything in Australia. And we're effectively, committing energy suicide. And the reality is, Luke, if you ration energy and you force generation through less energy dense sources and less efficient sources like wind and solar, you're going to ration productivity and growth. It's as simple as that. And that is exactly what Australia has done. And if you want a glimpse into our future, we only need to look at South Australia. So South Australia generates roughly 75% of its electricity from wind and solar. But guess what? It has the most expensive power costs in the nation. And that serves as a warning. And South Australia shut down its last coal-fired power plant in 2016, so 9 years ago. And what it's basically done is it's meant that South Australia has become uber reliant on expensive gas, batteries and diesel. And it's pushed up its average generation costs because a lot of the time it's during peak demand times, it's relying on very expensive sources of energy because, coal is no longer available. And then also South Australians have been saddled with enormous bills to pay for the transmission costs of all their, dispersed renewable generation, which is all over the state. And as a result, it pays the highest retail power bills in the country. And the fact of the matter is South Australia would experience regular blackouts if it didn't have an interconnector into Victoria to use Victorian brown coal. So what happens to the country when we all become South Australia? And, in a decade's time, we're scheduled to shut down all our coal-fired generation, which has provided the country with stable, cheap, non-weather dependent baseload generation or dispatchable generation for effectively generations. And once we shut that down, we're going to basically have a system whereby we get too much power in the middle of the day when it's sunny, when we don't need it, or, whenever the wind blows, which is, you can never predict when that's going to be.
Yeah.
And then we're going to have to build just enormous amounts of backup like storage and batteries, and then we're going to be uber reliant on gas, which is super expensive, which are also stuffed up because we don't reserve gas on the East Coast, so that's uber expensive as well. All this sort of stuff. And all it means is that ultimately we're going to have soaring energy costs, which is just going to add costs throughout the entire economy. It's going to force us to deindustrialise, and we're going to become less productive and have lower growth, and we're going to be rationing our economic growth and potential. And as a result, we're going to become poorer. And these are two areas where this productivity summit didn't even bother to discuss. And in fact, on energy, instead they discussed how we can move to net zero quicker, and which is just insane when we should be saying, why are we even doing this when we're 1% of the world's carbon emissions?
Yeah.
And we export 7 times more coal than we use, and we export 4 times more gas, a lot of which goes to China, and they just burn with impunity.
Yeah, it's bad. Mate, but people look at the horizon and a lot of us can see a high-speed train coming at us, but sadly, the majority right now think it's Thomas the Tank Engine. And until people get their head around these issues and properly understand what's ahead, then we're going to continue to do what we're doing and thinking, oh yeah, we're going to make the world such a wonderful place to be, and at the same time completely screw what used to be good old Australia. Can I move to? Well, I'll announce it for you, Clown of the Week, because this story, thank you, this story that Leith is about to share is so troubling. But I have to say, mate, 1,000,000 out of 10 to you for calling it out and investigating what's going on here. Tell the listeners what's happened.
Yeah, okay. So just a very quick bit of background. There's 2 key pieces of migration data that are released by the ABS. So we've got the official quarterly net overseas migration data, which is the official, and that's published on basically a 9-month delay. So the latest reading we've got is for the December quarter of last year. So we're in late August now, and we're going to get the March read, so 6 months ago, towards the end of September. So it's very untimely. It's incredibly lagged. It's up to a 9-month delay. So instead, economists forever have been using the second data set, which is the net permanent and long-term arrivals data, which is basically released monthly. So it's a high frequency indicator, and that historically it's tracked very closely to net overseas migration. Right. So it's not perfect. It's not as accurate, but it's a very good leading indicator.
What does it look like on a graph? Do they come up close to the same shape?
Absolutely, mate. Like incredibly close. And the thing about it is, in the last 6 months, so the first half of this year, we got the highest ever net permanent long-term arrivals for a 6-month period for the first 6 months of the year in history. So it actually is 5% higher than last year, which is a record, right? So people like me and other parts of the media have been reporting this as it looks like net overseas migration has spiked again, and that the government's not controlling immigration, right? Because over a 30-year period, the 2 series have tracked each other almost 1 for 1.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a pretty fair, assumption to make.
And they did say, just to interrupt briefly, the government did say they were bringing the immigration numbers down, didn't they?
That's right.
That's a commitment.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've also seen the rental market tighten up. So all the rental vacancy data's tightened up, and rents are starting to rise again, which suggests that immigration's gone up, right? So
yeah.
you just put 1 and 1 together. But anyway, on Wednesday night, I received an email from the ABS basically saying that I've been misleading by using this data, and I've got to stop using it. Effectively, it was basically a cease and desist email, and I was pretty annoyed about it because while they're trying to censor me, and I end up speaking to other people in the media, and they've also been sent the same thing. But the Australian government has a document which has been published by the Centre for Population. It's basically like a document on how to use migration statistics for the government. It's called Fundamentals of Migration in Australia, Migration Concepts and Measurements. Again, it's the Centre for Population, official letterhead, everything. And it explicitly states that net permanent long-term arrivals, quote, can be used as a potential leading indicator for net overseas migration and are, quote, early indicator of future migration flows. So here it is. Myself and others, and economists forever, have been using this series as a lead indicator because we're not going to wait 9 months to find out what happened to migration 6 months ago, right?
Yeah.
So, of course, we're always doing forecasting. We're trying to work out where migration's going. The Centre for Population says it's okay to use this data. But then we've got the ABS who's tried to strong-arm myself and a whole bunch of others into stop using this data. And it's just, it appears this is rank political interference here. And it appears like someone, probably in the Treasurer's office, I don't know, I'm just speculating, has strong-armed the ABS into going after the media because they don't like the narrative that net permanent long-term arrivals in the first 6 months of this year were the highest in Australia's history. And it appears, if you base it on historical correlations and relationships, that net overseas migration has risen again, which is obviously not what the government wants, has promised us. And I personally just think this is totally inappropriate for the ABS to be contacting us. They should be there as a statistical agency just to release the data and let us debate it. And if people disagree, they can debate us, whatever. It's just rank political interference. And the thing is, Luke, there are so many areas where the ABS could interfere in a similar way. So, for example, economists often refer to the monthly CPI indicator, which is not nearly as comprehensive or accurate as a quarterly inflation, which is the official quarterly. But we often, I don't personally, but others refer to it as inflation, which is actually, the ABS could say, no, you shouldn't refer that to inflation, you should wait for the quarterly. But they don't do that. They never call out politicians and the education lobby for misleadingly quoting the ABS's $51 billion education exports figure, which the ABS itself has admitted is grossly overstated.
Because, just to make the point for listeners, if an overseas student buys a roll of toilet paper at Woolies, that roll of toilet paper, the cost of it, is counted as an export. Is that right?
That's right. So basically all expenditure by students is counted as an export if you're on a student visa, even if you work in Australia and you earn money here. So obviously if they come over here and work and then they spend the money they work, that is not an export because it's been earned here. They also don't account for remittances, which are sent back home. And just last year, according to the World Bank, about $15 billion net was sent back home from migrants out of Australia, so that should be deducted from the figure. So there's all these things they could be calling out. But politicians and the education lobby quote this $51 billion figure, which is fantastical and totally bloated and inaccurate, as fact. But the ABS don't call them out, but then they're having a go at us, me, for using it.
So I'm going to run out of time. Are you going to drop off and just let it sit here or not?
No, mate, I'm going to keep using this figure. Of course I am.
What about asking the question about what's going on here, what drove this inquiry or response from them? It sounds like this has got freedom of information request written all over it.
That's right, and my understanding is the Institute of Public Affairs, who also got hit, has launched a whole bunch of FOI requests on who ordered this.
Right. He's the best in the business, macrobusiness.com.au. Great to chat, mate. Thank you so much for that. Talk again next week.
Cheers, Luke.
Can you believe that? Can you honestly believe that? That is red hot. That is red hot. And I don't know this, but for the ABS to bounce back at a commentator, I would imagine someone within government, an advisor or someone says, oi, I don't know, but I imagine how that happens. Or have we got now the ABS, who I thought counted things independently, were removed from the commentariat. That's got a long way to go. That is red hot, I'm telling you.